Hey y'all, welcome back to another book review. Kind of. I definitely didn't expect my second ever video that I posted on this channel to be a DNF, but here we are. So today I want to talk to you guys about King of Immortal Tithe by Ben Alderson. Before I can get into it though, a couple of quick disclaimers. First of all, this is just my opinion, so if you disagree, that is totally fine. I promise it's not anything personal. I also am not trying to say in any definitive way that this is a bad book or that Alderson is a bad writer. I'm just talking about why I personally didn't enjoy it. Secondly, I didn't finish the book, so there inherently can't be full spoilers, but I also feel like I can't talk about why I didn't finish the book without talking about spoilers for as far as I did read. I got about halfway through, so I guess this is like a half spoiler warning, just to be aware that I am going to be talking fully in terms of what I did know by the halfway point. And then lastly, you might have already seen or heard, but my cat is here with me. If you hear her meowing, or if you see her, or if you see me moving to pet her, worst case scenario, she shakes the camera. I'm really sorry if that is distracting to you guys, but she tends to get excited when I talk a lot, so she's just kind of here hanging out with me, and hopefully that won't be too bothersome. But with all that being said, let's finally actually start talking about it. So King of Immortal Tithe follows two main characters, Arlo and Faery. Also, I should say, sorry if I mispronounce anything. For the most part, the reader follows Arlo, although every once in a while there are a few pages or chapters written from Faery's point of view. Arlo lives in a town called Tithe. Tithe is a walled city that is kind of separated from the outside world because the outside world has been overrun by vampires. The novel actually opens up to Arlo hunting down one of these vampires for its blood. He has a disease that is slowly killing him and has already killed his parents, and drinking vampire blood is the only way he has found to combat that. Life in Tithe does not seem to satisfy Arlo. It seems like it's hard and often joyless, and the reader is given the impression that the only reason Arlo is even really bothering to fight off the disease that he has is for his sister. Said sister, Ariel, does not even know he's ill. But if she did, I don't know if it would make a huge difference to the story. They don't seem to get along very well. They love each other because they are siblings and family, but they seem to have very different ideas of what they want from life or what they view as worthwhile. Faery, on the other hand, lives in the elven world of Evelina, which makes perfect sense because he is an elf. He has been cursed with the power of death and therefore cannot touch anyone without instantly killing them. This power of his has led to a rift between him and the rest of his family, and because he's actually a royal elf, that also brings politics into the problem. The premise of this book is that the human city of Tithe is only safe because the elves help to protect it from the vampires. In exchange, once a year, the humans hold the choosing. This is a ceremony where a few select elves cross over the border between their two realms into the human world, and they pick a mate. Humans are not forced to attend this ceremony, but many do because they actually want to be chosen. They view it as a way to kind of escape their dull and hard life in Tithe, so most people are excited for the choosing. Arlo is not, though. In an attempt to prove that Faery cannot safely procreate and therefore continue on the royal line, and therefore is not a suitable next in line for the throne, his political rival slash grandmother slash the current queen of the elves, Claria, sends him to the choosing. She thinks that by showing that he is going to instantly kill whoever he tries to choose, she will be able to get rid of him as the heir to the throne. Faery almost chooses Ariel, but at the last second, Arlo steps in, grabs his arm, and stops him from doing so. Because of this breach of protocol, the choosing is ended early. But Faery cannot stop thinking about the fact that Arlo is the first person ever that he has either touched or been touched by who didn't immediately die. Because of this, he goes back right before the order between their two worlds closes for another year and kidnaps Arlo, bringing him back to Evelina. Arlo desperately wants to return to Tithe, but because the gateway is only open once a year on the choosing, he is forced to stay in Evelina for the next year. While he's there, he's obviously stuck with Faery in the middle of this warring royal elven family, with perhaps the weight of both of their worlds on his shoulders. Since this review as a DNF is inherently going to be a bit more on the negative side, I did want to really quickly address my favorite thing about the book, which was the way that Alderson describes things. I do mean that in a very physical sense. Whenever there was a new character or a setting or an outfit to be described, he did so beautifully. It was very easy to picture in my head what was happening in the story because he was very, very good with wordsmithing when it came to describing these things. Unfortunately, though, that is like the main positive and really the only positive I can think about when it comes to my personal experience reading this book. Again, I cannot express enough that I'm not trying to say Alderson is a bad writer or that King of Immortal Tithe is a bad book definitively, but I just didn't enjoy it, so let's get into why that is. Though I have no personal experience, I assume it's no small feat to write a novel, and I imagine that it's even more difficult to write a fantasy novel. If you write a book that, say, takes place in London, people live in London, people know what London is like, and even if you don't live there personally, it's still on planet Earth, and planet Earth rules apply there, so you can kind of more easily engross yourself in the story. But with a fantasy world, you don't have that built-in setting. You don't have that built-in sense of belonging for your reader. So in addition to having to introduce the character and the plot line, you also have to introduce the literal entire world, the culture and the society, and potentially the magic system. It's a lot. And for me, it's very hard for an author to introduce all of that in a way that is not overwhelming. I want to talk about Harry Potter for a second, and because I'm going to do that, I have to give a huge disclaimer here. I know that Rowling is not a super great person, and some of the things that she built into her world were inherently harmful. For example, making house elves a race of slave creatures who love to be enslaved was weird, to say the absolute least, and abhorrent to say more of my opinions on that. But I think that it's a good example to use only because so many people have read Harry Potter, so it's more likely to be a reference that you guys will understand what I'm talking about with. In Harry Potter, you are introduced to the wizarding world through the lens of Harry, who, coincidentally, is also just being introduced to this world. Because of that, whenever something new comes up that doesn't exist in the real world, it can be very easily explained to the reader because it makes sense for it to be explained to Harry as well. For example, the game of Quidditch. Before reading Harry Potter, no one would know what Quidditch is, and Harry, when he is introduced to the game, also has no idea what it is or what the rules of the game are. Because he's just as clueless as the reader, the rules can be explained in a way that doesn't feel awkward. If Ron, who has grown up not only watching Quidditch, but also around people who play Quidditch, were the main character, it would feel really weird for people to be explaining the rules of Quidditch to him. So if he were the main character, it would take the reader out of the story when the rules are explained because it doesn't make any sense. But because Harry is new to this world and he also doesn't know what Quidditch is, the reader can get an understanding of how the game is played without it taking them out of the story and without it not making sense within the context of the story. In general, Harry allows the world of Hogwarts to be explained to the reader without it being something weird. This is definitely not the only successful way to introduce a fantasy world, and I really am not trying to praise Rowling because, again, I know that that's like a whole can of worms. She's not a great human being, like I said, and there's a lot wrong with the world building of Harry Potter. But in this particular instance, I think that it's a fair example to give. When I read Harry Potter as a child, I was never confused to the point of frustration because I knew that if I had a question, it would be explained with relative speed and in a way that made perfect sense. This is a very personal thing for me, and I know that not everyone is going to feel the way I do, but while I love fantasy as a genre, it can also be very hard for me to read because I think it's so hard to effectively establish an entire new setting. If the world in a new book or series is not explained well, or is confusing, or just isn't given exposition quickly enough, it will make it very hard for me to want to keep reading because I just get frustrated instead of being curious. Definitely, like I said, some people have more tolerance for that, or some people might have even less, but I bring it up because it was a big reason why I did not finish King of Immortal Tithe. By the halfway point in the book, I had just figured out why the elves marry humans. I have a suggestion of Faenir's backstory, but given that it's a pretty interesting backstory, it's nowhere near as fleshed out as I would like for it to be. I have no idea what disease Arlo is afflicted with or why in the world drinking vampire blood helps. I have only a vague understanding of how the human world and the elven world are connected, and most of all, I have like a hint of an explanation as to how the human realm became overrun by vampires in the first place. But that to me is a problem because the whole story wouldn't be taking place if the elves and humans didn't have a connection because the human realm is taken over by the vampires. Like, it's a very foundational point of the story, and I don't understand it. Alderson, at the time of filming this video, has written one other novel that takes place in the same universe, which is called Lord of Eternal Night, and he also has plans to write a third. When I read this, I thought that maybe I had accidentally picked up the second book in a series, and that would explain why I was so completely baffled by what was going on. But when I checked his website to try to confirm that, it did say that while the two books take place in the same universe, King of Immortal Tithe is meant to be able to be read as a standalone novel. So it's possible that in his other book there is more exposition into the universe that these stories are set in, but since I'm supposed to be able to only read King of Immortal Tithe, I think it's fair to criticize it for not also having that information. In short, this complaint can be summed up as it is hard to effectively build a fantasy world and give the reader proper exposition, and in the case of King of Immortal Tithe, I just don't think that that explanation is there enough for me. I said earlier that I enjoy the way Alderson describes things, and that does still hold true. I mean, it's only been a few minutes. It'd be kind of weird if I changed my mind by now. But most other aspects of his writing style, at least within King of Immortal Tithe, I wasn't a huge fan of. I think the best way I can explain this complaint is that the novel kind of reads like a fanfiction, and I have to do another disclaimer with that. I have read my fair share of fanfiction, and I am in no way trying to belittle it or say that it's a lesser form of writing. Most of the fanfiction I have consumed has been of the romance genre. I'm a chronic shipper, and therefore I love reading romance fanfiction. I have read some fics that absolutely blow published, official books out of the water. I have felt so many emotions reading fanfiction, and some of the stories will live with me forever because they were just so good, so phenomenal. But I think that sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, you can tell that a fanfiction was written with the only goal in mind being the romance. The rest of the story is there as just a vessel to get to the romance, but it's not important in and of itself. This can lead to odd characterizations, weird pacing, or surroundings that are relatively empty in a literary sense. And sometimes that's fine. Especially when I'm reading fanfiction, I already know the story that this is based off of. I already have a understanding of the setting. The only reason I'm reading is because I'm looking for a factor, in this case of the romance, that wasn't in the original plot itself. So for specifically the fanfiction genre, I don't think that being overly romance-focused is always detrimental. It's just characteristic of a story that has already been told, a setting that has already been established, and in which just the romance is the thing that's being added on. Again, I can't stress enough that this isn't all fanfiction, just one particular subset or one particular type, but I bring it up because it's this type of fanfiction that King of Immortal Tithe reminds me of. The problem is, it's not fanfiction. It's an original story, which means that Arlo and Faenir's tale hasn't already been told. I don't already know where I am or what the basic plotline or premise is or how the world works. Because this novel is entirely original, it can't have just the romance as the focus because everything else has to also be explained, and I just don't think that that is how this book works. For one thing, the character motivations are inconsistent at best and non-existent at worst. During the half of the novel that I did read, I got the sense that it was just trying to get to the point where the main characters are a couple rather than actually telling a story. Independently, they do technically have their own reasons for acting as they do and doing the things that they do, but those independent personalities are just not as fleshed out as I would hope for them to be. Faenir doesn't like that he can't touch anyone without killing them and is therefore forced to lead a life of solitude, ostracized from his family. That's a very interesting premise that I think deserves to be explored on its own, but it's mostly brought up in relation to Arlo. Obviously, because the politics are kind of a part of the book, it is referenced in terms of the politics, but I think that the emotional damage Faenir would have experienced because he literally can't be connected to anybody is severely undervalued. It isn't explored independently enough to make it feel like a genuine part of his character. Instead, it just feels like the role he was assigned to get him to Arlo. Arlo, on the other hand, dearly loves his sister and desperately wants to protect her, and the actions that he takes in attempting to do so are what leads him to being taken to Evelina. That is a plot point that could work, but his reasons for being so protective are just, again, not fleshed out. They're very flimsy. They seem like something that has been assigned to him in order to get him to Faenir instead of being an independent emotion he genuinely holds. There's one quote that I want to share with you guys that is going to make me seem really petty, but by the time I had come across this section of the book, I was already feeling all of the frustrations that I have been describing to you, so it just hit me a little harder than maybe it should have. During a fight between Faenir and one of his cousins, Arlo narrates, "There was much unsaid between them, a story that I longed to dig my claws into and uncover, but all I cared about was getting free of this place and returning to Ariel." Again, I know I'm being petty, but all I could think when I read that was that you cannot say your singular desire, the only thing you want in the world, is to return to your sister, and in literally the same sentence say that you're desperately interested in Faenir's family drama. Those, don't go together. That doesn't make sense. I literally wasn't even thinking about the story or thinking about enjoying the story. I just was completely taken out of it by that quote. And the reason it bothered me so badly is because this passage gave me the impression that character, personality traits, and motivations would be muddied or changed in order to facilitate the romance rather than being separate, independent, and consistent parts of their characterization. The pacing of Arlo and Faner's relationship also reminds me of a fanfiction. Arlo spends most of his time absolutely hating the fact that he isn't Evelina at all and wanting less than nothing to do with Faner. When he does want anything to do with Faner, he is thinking of violence toward him, but then he rapidly shifts to thinking that since he's already stuck in the Elven realm, he might as well help Faner out with his family drama, and also throwing himself at his elven captor in a sexual manner. And I know that these things can be explained. Physical attraction doesn't have to equate to a healthy or happy relationship. And Arlo could have his own motivations for being willing to help Faner. But to me, the novel is so focused on getting to the point where these two are in a relationship, even if it's not the healthiest version of one, that those explanations aren't given at all. Instead, it just makes the romance feel rushed and strange because it's something that we are so desperately trying to achieve, but it's not established in a proper way. Again, I do know that to some extent I'm being hypocritical. I said earlier that I have read fanfictions that have felt like this, and I have enjoyed those immensely. But I think the problem is that when I read a fanfiction, I know I'm reading it just for the romance. With this book, I knew it was a romance novel, but I kind of assumed that there would be something else there. Instead, King of Immortal Tithe feels like the romance was written first, and then all of the other story elements were like very hastily added to prop it up just enough to justify it being turned into a published work. I also didn't know where else to put this in the video, but I did want to mention that Alderson's website says that King of Immortal Tithe is meant to be a retelling of the Hades and Persephone story, and I don't know if I'm just really oblivious, but I didn't get that at all. It is possible that he wanted it to be more of a vague reference than a literal retelling, but I genuinely never would have made the connection if I didn't read that on his website. Yeah, there are two like different worlds and one of the main characters has death powers, but to me that's where the similarities end, and I just wanted to mention that. I know inherently all reviews are opinion-based, but I feel like that is especially true for DNF reviews. I really can't stress this enough, but I'm not trying to insult Alderson, and I'm not trying to insult the book. If you liked it, that is fantastic. Like, I'm glad that you can enjoy it even though I can't, but I just really didn't. When I like a book, I cannot put it down. I will literally spend all of my free time reading, and sometimes that means that I finish books in 1 to 2 days because I just won't do anything else besides the necessities other than read this book. But King of Immortal Tithe was not like that. I read bits and pieces of it over the course of 2+ months. My first review that I actually posted on this channel was for the plot, and I started reading that book after I started reading King of Immortal Tithe. So I started the plot, finished it, scripted a review, posted that review, and I did all of that before I managed to finish King of Immortal Tithe. For me, whenever I picked up this novel, it felt like a chore. I was reading it because the premise was interesting enough to where I did want to know what happened in the story, but instead of feeling enjoyment when I read, I just felt dread. I knew that if I was going to read, I needed to finish reading this book, so I avoided reading altogether. And at the end of the day, that's not a healthy thing to do, to deprive myself of something that I like doing because this particular book was making it feel less like something I like doing, so I ended up choosing not to finish it. I am very curious to hear what you guys think of this book if you have read it. Again, if you love it, I'm sorry, I promise it's not anything personal, but just wasn't for me. But yeah, I'm curious about what the consensus is, because I don't know if other people feel the same way I do, but let me know, I guess. Overall, though, I hope you guys did enjoy the video. If you did, if you could give it a like and subscribe for more, that would be really awesome. But I hope you guys have a lovely rest of your day or your night or whatever it might be, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye, guys.